Welcome to the Regeneration Collective podcast, The Next UN for a Regenerative Future. I'm Silke von Brockhausen, a UN insider with 18 years across more than a dozen UN missions and founder of the Regeneration Collective. As the UN approaches its 80th year and the campaign for the next Secretary General gets underway, amid protracted conflicts, inequalities, and cross-planetary boundaries, we ask, how can the UN become the platform through which people, institutions, and the more than human world repair and transform broken systems and create conditions where life can thrive? In each episode, we speak with regenerative practitioners, policy shapers, indigenous knowledge holders, peace builders, culture makers, and frontline humanitarians about the lived experiences and visions that could translate into regenerative UN policies, organizational culture, and operations. This is for UN staff, partners, member states, and bridge builders who are curious about what regeneration means in practice and who are ready to turn the UN into a trailblazer for this shift. Today's guest is Manda Scott, novelist, regenerative economist, and host of the much-loved Accidental Gods podcast, now over 200 episodes deep in conversations at the edge of conscious, systemic change. Trained as a veterinary surgeon, Manda's path arcs through award-winning fiction, shamanic practice, and a master's in regenerative economics at Schumacher College. She coined Throughtopia, stories that help us move through the meta crisis toward a future where people and planet can thrive. And she's been equipping thousands with the inner and outer tools to get there. I can't think of a better guide for a conversation about how the UN could become a truly regenerative institution through its people, its culture, and its policies. Hi, Manda. So happy to have you here.
Thank you. Hi, it's an honor to be here. And imagine if the UN could actually become a leader of regenerative change on the planet. It would be such an astonishing thing. So thank you.
I fully agree, and I do imagine it, and I think it's possible. And I know you share this hope for our future. So let me get started with the first question I ask all my guests. What does regeneration mean to you, and why is it essential at this point in history?
Oh, we could spend the next hour just on this. You realize that, don't you? Regeneration has meant a lot in different times to me. Now, here, today, it means offering ourselves in service to life, whatever that means. I think our current system is not fit for purpose. I don't think it has been fit for purpose probably ever, and it certainly isn't now. And I don't think it's our evolutionary maximum. I think we can do so much better. And we live in a world where sustainability has been devalued as a name and as a concept, and it broadly has come to mean doing slightly less harm. And regeneration at its deepest means taking our place as integral nodes in the web of life and working with the whole of the web in a multifaceted web where some of the nodes are humans and a lot of them are not. And becoming more aware of the web and our place in it and more able to work with and less certain that our head minds have the answer. I think the more I work with this, the more I understand that heart mind connects to the web, and the web as a whole is where our emergent future arises. Thinking we have the answers and trying to push ourselves towards it is broadly what's got us here. So for me, regeneration is offering ourselves in service to mind, from heart-mind connection with head-mind and service to heart-mind. Does that make sense, or am I using language that just goes off the scale?
For me, that absolutely makes sense. And in my view, this is a direction that we really all need to move towards. And I see personally the UN as a platform that could be part of this transition. And I think what would interest me is how can such an institution or any organization that you can think of, how can they become the embodiment of this vision for regeneration?
I don't actually know much about the UN. I mean, I know it exists, but I don't know how it works. But let's say that bracket this with I may be projecting an awful lot, and you can unpick for me the projections. However, for me at the moment, with my understanding just now, everything starts inside with each of us. Dick Schwartz, who founded internal family systems therapy, which is a terribly bad name for something that is revolutionary, says that almost all of us, almost all of the time, are walking around in a state of internal civil war. And the only question is the extent to which we acknowledge this. Yeah, I'm sure there are a few individuals on the planet who have transcended that. Dalai Lama probably, Thich Nhat Hanh when he was alive, people like that. But most of us still have warring parts. Do the thing, don't do the thing, often in binaries, and very deep parts that are going, this wounding happened at a point in history, of my history, and will do whatever it takes to make sure that that level of trauma never happens again. And so we project out and defend. And our triggered parts can move very fast and very powerfully and often without our conscious minds being aware. And then we layer post hoc excuses on afterwards of why we did the thing, whatever the thing was. And our mental constructs are very rarely, unless we've done a lot of inner work, actually that related to why we did the thing. And I think we have taken that level of basically not being particularly sorted and yet pretending we can all put the suit on. Well, personally, I don't wear suits, but we can, you can put the smart clothes on and play the game, and with a lot of other people who are putting the smart clothes on and playing the game and tell each other that you're acting as adults. And I think there's a lot of inner growth. There's a lot of space for inner growth. And if we did that, our entire culture from top to bottom would be a different place. And I don't think we have a lot of a window to kick the can further down the road. Also, we have the technologies now, which our parents and grandparents did not have. Freud was an interesting individual, but Freudian therapy is, with the greatest respect to Freudian therapists, I don't see it as doing the work that needs to be done. Whereas I think some of the more modern things, like internal family systems, like more of the embodied therapies, have a different language set and a different set of premises. So IFS, for instance, says we can at least, if we can take a breath, take the time, declare an inner truce. And then we can begin to find out what the parts need to heal. And in the doing of that, we bring those parts into creative alignment with the rest of our system. If a part that has spent all of our life and possibly ancestral lines back, like that thing is never going to happen again. We will defend against that in whatever way. We will declare war on other people, or we will assault first, or we will go and hide in a corner, or whatever is our defense system. If that part isn't having to do that and can bring all that power and creativity in service to our system, and our system is then in service to life, we have no idea where that would take us. And so it's not a popular thing in some of the circles that I move in. Everybody wants outer change, but I don't think we'll get the outer change without the inner change. We could hackney Einstein a little bit and say, no problem is soul in the mindset that created it. And the mindset is the heart set. And we won't get anywhere by just moving around the chess pieces on the board. We need to throw that game away, start with a new game. And that's hard. Everybody would rather do the outer work than the inner work. But I think you got the time to not do it anymore. I think whoever you're alive on the planet now, this is your work.
I hear you, and I fully feel with you, and I've seen that also in my work environment. All the colleagues that have been very centered, very grounded, very purpose-driven, and done a lot of work on themselves also in very difficult circumstances, they radiated this calmness and they radiated this trust around them, because people can sense it if somebody is coherent
Yes.
inside and acts with integrity, and it's something we can all strive for and it's doable. And it reminds me of this quote. I think it was Prigogine. I don't know if I pronounced the word right, but when a complex system is far from equilibrium, like our
Yes.
world right now, small islands of coherence in a sea of chaos have the capacity to shift the entire system to a higher order.
Yes.
And I think that's what you're also alluding to, that this is what we could strive for, and that would have ripple effects inside the UN, and then the UN would have ripple effects wherever we go in the whole world. So
Yes.
the question now is, how do we get to this place? Because I feel there's so much urgency in what we're doing. We never have enough time. We don't have the energy. The system drains us. We work 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, because we feel like we need to do everything to support our cause. And there's maybe also stigma attached, or not the awareness that it's needed. So do you have any magic wand that can turn us all into coherent islands?
No, I don't. I don't think there are magic ones. I think so. That there are no magic ones, but the first step is knowing that we need to do it. And the second step is knowing that the resources do exist and that we're not alone. I think we live in a world where we're grasping after little dopamine hits, and if we get them with overwork, it's not that different to getting them from snorting cocaine or drinking alcohol or white carbs or whatever is our addiction of choice. However, what we're really looking for, what would really fill the void inside is human connection and reciprocal pride. That serotonin mesh instead of the dopamine drip network. And I'm sure within the UN, there's a lot of reciprocal pride. You must be changing people's lives. And then you get that sense of, yes, I am doing something really good in the world. But burnout must be a hair's breadth away, I imagine. And so what happens if we all take a step back and a big breath and say, okay, burnout is a breath away. Not burning out would be good. Also, the bus that is humanity is heading over the edge of the cliff at the moment. And we can put plasters around the edges. I think the bus is going over the edge of the cliff. And yet, with my kind of shamanic hat on, we're getting so much help from the more than human world, from whatever we call the not human aspects of the way the world is. And I don't think we'd be getting that help if going over the edge of the cliff was guaranteed. I think it's definitely possible, but I think there is also the potential to turn the bus. So what happens if everybody steps back a little bit from slapping plasters over the obvious wounds and works on turning the bus from the edge of the cliff? And I come back to Joanna Macy, who was an amazing individual. And she talked about the 3 pillars of the Great Turning. Is that something that you've explored on the podcast already?
No, not yet. Just personally.
So holding actions, systems change, shifting consciousness, a triangle, all 3. And some people, we need to do the holding actions. We need to stop people being randomly slaughtered by other people who just have projecting out their inner wounds too much. That needs to happen. We need to create the maps of systems change. And I think this is an interesting thing, something I learned recently. If we are imagining stuff that we know, so I said, imagine getting up tomorrow and having a normal work day, that's really quite effortless because it's probably going to look quite a lot like today. It might even look like last year. If I say, okay, 10 years from now, what's your day going to look like? That's hard. And it takes 5 parts. We look at the cognitive neuroscience in real blocky stuff. If proper cognitive neurosciences, please switch off in this bit because this is blocky, but it takes 5 parts of our brain to imagine something that's quite like today. If we want to imagine something radically different, it takes 11 parts. And it's not just twice as much, that's exponentially more effort on a neurocognitive level. And we're not wired to do brain effort. We're wired to find the least effortful path. But what we do is we go into our hippocampus first and we look at the things that we know. And we look, can we rearrange those in a new way? What we can't do is make new stuff. All we can ever do is take the Lego bricks that are in there and build a new castle with them. And then we go to our ventromedial prefrontal cortex and we go, does this meet my aims and desires? Does it match? And then we go to our limbic system, deep in our hindbrain, and go, how do I feel about this? Multiple pieces in each place. And so nobody is going to be able to build imaginary futures, the structures, the second of Joanna Macy's 3 pillars, the systems change ideas, without new ideas to build them from. So when we get to certain of the political stances in the world at the moment, what they are doing is picking up the past and kind of polishing it a bit and going, we want the future to look a lot like the past, but we're in control now when we weren't before. You know, the American right wants a white supremacist patriarchal theocracy run along the lines of the Inquisition. They are quite open about this. And up to a point, we all know what that looks like. It's not requiring a lot of brain stuff. And I don't want to live in that, but if you're a straight white Christo-fascist, you might quite like that. We, in the generative side, at the point of regenerative or generative future thinking is that we are emerging into a new system. And another thing that Ilya, I say Prigogine, but I don't know either, said, one of the theory for which I believe he got the Nobel Prize was his concept of complex systems. So they rise up to a maximal complexity, at which point their trajectory bifurcates, the potential trajectory bifurcates, and it can either crash into chaos and extinction, or it can emerge to a new system. And the point about a new system is we don't know what it looks like. If we could predict that, it's not a new system, it's the old system. It's the bus with the wheels painted different color. we cannot predict where we're going. All we can say is, here are the conditions that we believe from our relatively inadequate brains will lead us towards the emergence of a generative system that is in service to life. And I spend a lot of time on the edges of conversations with people like Nora Bateson, who would be a very good person to talk to, about the fact
She's
that
coming next week.
well, talk to Nora about this. She's really looking at, if I've understood, I haven't talked to her directly about this, but I was just talking to a friend of hers this morning, that even that much is hard to predict, that we can create perhaps the spaces within which emergence might be able to happen. And that's probably as far as we can go. And that's a much less clear cut ask than the political chaos of the Christofascists. And yet I think we need to get there. I am fairly certain that Bannon will not get his 10,000-year Reich because they are in climate denial to get there. And I don't think we got 10,000 years if we go the direction they want. So I'm quite, I can sleep at night because I don't think his 10,000-year Reich is happening. But I think it's not happening because human extinction is a really obvious option. My friends who are climate scientists are in levels of terror that I hadn't seen before. And periodically I look at their work and go, oh, I wish I didn't know that. How? So I think we're a lot closer to the edge than our limbic systems would like us to believe, and than our deep narratives are telling us. Because our deep narratives have a lot of vested interest in maintaining the myth of perpetual economic growth and perpetual evolution of the existing system. And I think the existing system is not fit for purpose, and our previous conversation is crashing a lot faster than we think. So if we take that on board, and we could argue about that, but to an extent, I think the fact that we can argue about that is a very deliberate policy, and I think it's a mistake. We are taking ourselves into a polycrisis, and it's not just climate. We could zero the CO2 tomorrow, and the oceans would still be dying, and AI would still be running riot, and we would still have deep political crisis because capitalism has taken itself as far as it can go, and the next step is probably techno-feudalism, unless, again, we change direction. So how do we change direction? And we don't do it by thinking about it. We do it by feeling into that space. And that's a messy, unpredictable, quite inspiring and exciting place to be. But we cannot get there until we've done the inner work. We will not get there by deciding that with all of our traumas and our internal civil war, we're going to change the world. So we've just got to work.
Full circle. You just explained to us the whole meta crisis and where we're stuck, and also where we can get out. And I think that's for me the key part, that we do need to envision a new, beautiful future that we might not even believe that can happen, but that is somewhere in us. And for that, we do need to listen also inside and do this inner work, because the better future is something that is just connecting us much closer to life and back to who we are. And we need to create this spaces of emergence, which you said, which I think that's so fundamental to the solutions that we need. And for me, the big question is, how can we provide these spaces of emergence in a work setting? To come back very, very practical, if I'm a manager of a team in the UN or anywhere else, how can I allow for this emergence to happen? And in my view, it has also a lot to do with unlearning what we think is the right way to act and do in this world, to decolonize our mind. But in a work setting, what could I do as a manager, in your view?
That's an extraordinarily good question, and nobody has asked me that before. Alrighty, bear in mind that I used to be a veterinary surgeon, and then I was an author, and I've never actually worked in an office in my life. So my imagining of what your workspace is probably different than it actually is. However, I think so the first thing would be setting some ground rules. And one of them would be, we work in good faith. We bring good faith to every conversation. We assume that the person with us is speaking in good faith from the best of themselves, unless we have absolute evidence to the contrary. That we make the space and the time. So I am really, foundationally, I believe that the web of life is on our side. We are integral nodes of the web of life. Vanessa Andriotti, who wrote Hospicing Modernity, everybody should read it. Her Indigenous grandfather said that the core wounding of our culture is not the genocide of the people and the theft of the land, bad though they were. He was Brazilian, Indigenous. But the core wounding is the belief in separability. We believe that we are not an integral part of the web of life when manifestly we are. And I'm not interested in monotheist religions, but I am interested in how do I connect heart to heart with the web of life in a way that it becomes a source of intelligence and creativity and connection. And so in your offices, how do you create the space where that's even a possibility? How do you create the space for people to feel embodied, not to feel cut off? How do you perhaps create time for some of the more recent technologies? There's a thing called noting, Noting, where you're simply noting what's there. You sit in a pair with a person, and I would say sore shoulder. So that's what came up when I just went inside. And you would say, whatever is most alive for you in the moment, and it would come back to me, and I might say, cat snoring. And you say something for you. And over this, and you do this for 10 or 15 minutes, over the space of that time, you become much more embodied, but you also become much more aware of the energetic space between two people. And it's a very settling thing. And it creates, in my experience, it creates heart opening, provided both people come in good faith. I think really finding values that everyone in the workspace can agree on. The ones that I am working on at the moment are integrity, compassion, and generosity of spirit. But they have to be, you can't impose that. I can impose that on my inner system because I've done a reasonable amount of work to check with most of the parts that I can talk to that we're all okay with that. Can you gather together all the people within a particular work system and go, okay, what are the values we all agree on? And they might be completely different, generative, positive values. And can we try for a day, a week, to really live by those? It's not easy when a lot of the time we're running flat out, we're exhausted and we're reacting. But we want to get to a place where we're responding rather than reacting. How can we do that? And it comes down to what's our value set? How do we interact with each other? How do we make decisions? Sociocracy now is an amazing way of decision making that I think, I'm guessing you already brought it in, but we don't have to all agree, but we have to all not disagree. Takes things, and if you disagree, you have to suggest a better option than the one that is currently on the table. And good enough for now, safe enough to try. The cores of sociocracy, and devolve decision making to the lowest possible level that you can. So the people on the ground make the decisions for what's happening on the ground, and you keep revising. So we stop feeling that we have to be right all the time, and we have to make decisions that are locked in aspect. And we carved this on a panel of stone, and this is us for the rest of forever. This works today. Enough. We'll check next week. Is there an idea that would work better? We'll try that. I'm guessing all of these are things you already do.
I wish. I feel like what you are alluding to, that's like the essence of regenerative leadership. And my heart rings listening to this because this is exactly the work environment I want to work in. And I'm sure my colleagues would feel very comfortable in it as well. And I think naturally some of our teams also operate like this and others don't. And in general, the UN is very hierarchical. It's really about what is your position level, and it's very centralized, usually in New York or other headquarters. And there is a movement to try to decentralize and to give more agency to those closest to the front lines. And for that, there's trust needed. And I think that's what you also alluded to, Red, in the exercise you suggested. It's really to build this environment of trust where you can fail and risk, try something out, be yourself, and don't have to change. And for me, that's really what I want to explore in my teams. How can I create this? And I always start with like a values exercise of what are our values as a team, and then I put the posters in every office. And I always try to come back to these posters. I'm like, we agreed on this. This is our value. How are we reflecting it? And then I realize I'm going myself into this mode of working too much, getting impatient. And again, I'm overstepping my own values. And I feel like that's also okay. Like if you observe it, you can also accept that and maybe address it, because we're just all flawed human beings trying to wing it in the best way possible. But it's not an easy environment, and it's also I think it's very patriarchal, and in a sense, it's also built on a colonial history, and you can still feel that inside. And also at the same time, you can feel that it doesn't fit anymore in today's complexity. And I think what you shared are some great tools where we can move into a different direction.
Inevitable. We all want to impress our own inner parts and each other. What happens if once every lunar cycle you go, okay, let's just check in. Are these the values we still, first of all, can we live up to these? Are they the values we still want? Do we want to modify the values? If so, good enough to try, safe enough for now is a really good baseline. Those are the values last week. They don't have to be the values this week. I think there's a Gandhi quote that says, God knows the truth. My truth changes from day to day. My commitment is to the truth, not to consistency. And I think just we are all fallible human beings, exactly as you said. And we're all growing and learning. And the values that I lived by last year might not be the values that are appropriate now. So what's the value set? How are we interacting with each other? Just bringing in people from the outside who can help the energetics. I think we all live in an energetic space, and we've decided that acknowledging this is somehow flaky. And yet, if you walk into a room with a bad atmosphere, your entire body does this. If you, exactly as you said, if you're in the presence of someone who's actually in their skin, knows who they are, grounded, fully being themselves, everybody chills. Maybe we just start acknowledging that, and then bring in the people who know how to work with that in a generative way, so that it's out there instead of being the thing that we don't talk about, and yet that is, 90% of our central nervous system is responding at that level. Why are we pretending that the 10% that doesn't is this 10% that's in charge when it really isn't? Motivated reasoning is huge. Somebody recently said, I think we make 0.05 of our decisions with our cerebral cortex. And that's mostly, what day is it and what's the weather out there and what's 3 times 2. And the rest of it is limbic and our brainstem. And we're doing that.
Survival mode, right?
And we're responding to the energies in the room. And some of those are human and a lot of them are not, but that's, and what we just looked at on Facebook, because that's impacting our energy systems, and what we saw on the television and the car crash outside the door. And we're responding to all of those things, and they are informing our decisions. And then we tell ourselves we're completely rational beings, which is utter nonsense. So what happens if we accept that we're not totally rational beings, but that we are energy literate, and we could work with that? And provided we did that openly, I mean, this might freak out the UN, so we're going way over the edge of where we can go to, but it is there. Pretending it's not is actually a form of psychosis. It's a collective psychosis. And maybe dropping that would be a good idea.
We have normalized it, and we have normalized living in our symbiotic nervous system. Is that how we call it? Sympathetic nervous system in English, right? Constantly in fight and flight mode, and that doesn't allow us to actually make life affirming decisions. It will just help us to stay alive ourselves and maybe act in the immediate danger around us, but it doesn't help us to think for the next 7 generation, which is what we should strive for with everything we do, also at global level, at the UN, and in our day-to-day decisions in our family and at work. And for me, that's how simple regeneration is switching into the parasympathetic nervous system, calm everybody down. And there are so many techniques to do that. And it comes from all cultures. We have it everywhere, in every culture, in every religion. And it's different for everybody. For me, it's grounding myself in nature, it's meditation, it's breathing deeply. But for others, it's something else. And if we do that, we go into our meetings, we are calm, and we have the ability to listen because we are not in this fight and flight mode. And for me, this listening to each other is one of the key points. And that's how I want to come to my next question for you, because I feel like one of the biggest tasks the UN has is really to reconstructing countries after war and conflict in many places, unfortunately. And we always do it in a rush. We do it to save as many lives as possible, which is fair enough. Do it under a lot of pressure from outside of people want to see data, facts, everything. But I think there's a regenerative way to do this. And for me, it starts also with listening to what the people actually want, that just lost all agency in their life in this conflict and this war. They lost their houses, everything. So how can we maybe approach this task, in your view, in a more life affirming way? Big question.
Yeah, you're asking me easy questions. However, this feels really exciting. So my first thought, as you were saying that, is we need to ask all of the life there, not just the people. And I completely get that your parameters and your metrics and the things that are calculated and the things that are measured are all to do with humans. But if we're going to create a regenerative future, it has to be in synchrony and enmeshed within the whole of the web of life. Because in any war zone, everything else has been annihilated too. And if you, for instance, build up the people by bringing in industrial agriculture processes instead of regenerative agriculture processes, it's not a long-term solution. That's kicking both the local community and the planet further towards the edge of biophysical breakdown. So the best thing you can do is go and ask the people. Listen, do a lot of listening to what were your networks that worked? Who were you? The leaders that everybody trusted, which are not usually the war leaders. It's often the grandmothers. Who knows? I couldn't answer that, but what were the networks? What were the size of the networks nodes that worked? So what was the village size? How many villages made a community? What would you like? Because I think one of the issues that comes up again and again when I look at these things is, if I take Francis Weller's framing of humanity evolved as an initiation culture, and we could go into detail on that, but let's not. That's 300,000 years of human evolution plus some indigenous communities around the world. Somewhere 10 to 12,000 years ago, the culture from which you and I emerged broke off and lost our knowing of the inseparability from the web of life. And we lost the initiations. And Francis Weller's definition of an initiation is episodic, intermittent, contained encounter with death. And so death is not just possible, it's probable, but the individual at any point, and these happen throughout life, the one we tend to fixate on is the adolescent one, so we'll go with that anyway. The young adolescent has had all of their prior life in which they know themselves to be an integral part of the web of life. John Young does a lot of work, and he says that by the age of 12, the average indigenous child has made 400 meaningful relationships with other species, as in meaningful relationships with 400 other species. By the age of 12, most people in our culture are lucky they've made one meaningful relationship in their life. So an indigenous initiation culture child, the way to get out of the contained encounter with death is to ask for help from the human, but mostly the more than human world. And if they can accept that help and integrate it and embody it, then they survive. And they come back to their people knowing what's mine. I come back knowing what's mine to do. And I know that I can do it really, really well because I am being me. And nobody else can be me. And I can be me really well if I'm in a supportive space that allows me to be me. And I am surrounded by other people who are being me, them, version of me. And we end up with that reciprocal pride of, I feel pride from the people I really respect who are proud of me and I am proud of them. And that fills the hole inside that we all feel, that we are in our culture trying to fill endlessly with dopamine. Does not and will not ever fill it. The little dopamine drips of white carbs or alcohol or porn or likes on the internet or righteous anger or my political stance won in this particular battle. All of these give us little tiny dopamine hits, but dopamine is short term. And I can have 3 different types of dopamine hit and they don't add up. They're each separate and they're subject to the laws of diminishing return. Serotonin, different set of, it's a mesh rather than little focal points in my brain, and it's additive. I get pride from you, I get pride from my friend, I get pride from the tree up the hill, I get pride from the red kite, they all add up. It's long lasting, it's enduring, and it's not subject to the laws of diminishing return. Pride from you today is the same value as pride from you yesterday and will be the same value as pride from you tomorrow. Respect, pride. Whereas my little dopamine hits are all, I need more of whatever it was to get the same dopamine hit. And the dopamine will never fill the void inside. So how do you go to people who have probably, if the UN is there helping them, at least partly been crushed into this trauma culture, which doesn't, so the trauma culture doesn't have the containment. When we reach our encounters with death, we just get traumatized, or that we have potential for trauma. And then the trauma stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks until it overflows. And we have a war or a breakdown or a mental health crisis, which is why the West is in the middle of a mental health pandemic. Because we're not feeding the part that actually needs to be fed. We're not giving people a regenerative sense of self that is rooted in connectivity with ourselves, each other, and the web of life. So going back into a community whose world has just been destroyed and replacing it with a destructive culture is not, in the long run, going to help. It may look really good. You may have high rises and banks and roads and cars, and they are not what we need. We need connections with ourselves, each other, and the web of life. Finding traumatized people. Rob Hopkins says capitalism is a disimagination machine. War is a massive disimagination machine. The more you're in sympathetic or dorsal vagal overload, the less creative and connected you are able to be. How do you create a space where people can be creative and connected, and where they can get in touch with their essential selves and answer from that place the question of what do you need us to do for you? Rather than we're going to come in with a kind of colonial mindset and decide that what you need is 3 acres of high rise and some shops and some Western medicine and some industrial agriculture. And let's just poison your entire environment even more than the war has just poisoned it. And let's contribute to the breakdown of biophysical reality on the planet. These are not useful things to do. Therefore, but what I'm asking of you is that you become the leading edge of regenerative change on the whole planet. That's a hard sell for people whose metrics are all of the old culture. But the old culture is not fit for purpose. It is taking us over the edge of the cliff. It would be absolutely amazing if the UN were able to actually move to a genuinely regenerative way forward. And then explain to people, the deep narratives, the narratives that underpin the stories we tell ourselves and each other about ourselves and each other. At the moment, are all predicated on power over structures.
Mm.
Can you change the deep narrative in the UN and the deep narrative in the communities with which you engage to create a regenerative deep narrative that says, I am a node in the web of life and my job is to be the best that I can be in asking the web, what does it need of me? And responding to that in real time. That might change the world, Silke, in the way that we
Yeah,
need.
let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's just imagine you just got elected to be the new Secretary General of the UN and start work on the 1st of January 2027. What would be your first acts of business be to make this vision happen, Manda?
My brain is falling over at this a little bit because I have no idea what size the UN is, but we would need.
It's 130,000 staff
Okay.
that you're the CEO for in 193 countries and about 30 different, very independent sub-organizations.
At scale. Okay, so my first act is to go to the web of life and ask for help. Genuinely. This is a very top-down structure from what I'm hearing. What we need is to build change at the ground up. So I'm guessing we have very good internet connectivity with everybody. Send out the email and create a citizens assembly at random from all of these 130,000 people and bring them all in. Let's say 99 people, but we'd have to do the work to make sure this was a representative sample, and mostly of the people at the ground level. There'd be a few at the hierarchical bits, but mostly I want the people who are right at ground to bring them in. And I would first, because I'm not in the UN, I would have to really sit and listen to them speaking about their experience. Once I've got that, I would really ask of them that we probably have a week somewhere completely cut off, like your phones. I'm sorry, we're just putting your phones in a lead bag somewhere, and we're going to spend the week connecting with each other and the web and asking, what is it that the world needs of us just now? And I don't know the answer to that. If I could predict the answer to that, we wouldn't need to go through this process. Have a proper citizens' assembly and then you get to people to talk to. And I would talk to a lot of Indigenous people and a lot of the people who are in the communities that you work with, and get to a point where at the end of it, the citizens' assembly gets to say the direction. And the direction might be, we need 10 more citizens' assemblies. We just spend 6 months connecting to people and to the wider web of life, finding out how we, the UN, can be a creative agency and an agent of change within the world, an agent that changes the deep narratives of the story of ourselves and each other, about ourselves and each other, and our place in the web of life. Because the current narratives are taking us over the edge of the cliff. They're not useful. So if we, all 130,000 people, were able to change our view of our place in the world, then we do. Meditation that I do, where I take people right back to the moment before the Big Bang, and then we go forward 7 generations in the reality in which we've created a generative future. And how
A
does that?
deep time walk.
A deep type of also going right forward. And most people, we can't predict what the world looks like if we get it right, but we can kind of know how it feels. You want to wake up in the morning and feel enthusiastic, inspired, and safe. You want to feel confident. You want to feel. These are really basic human needs. They're basic life needs. What does the world feel like if you are inspired, confident, and connected to yourself, each other, and the web of life? How does that feel? And for most people, the relief of just imagining feeling that is visible and palpable. And then this is something Nora, I think, probably doesn't agree with, because I think you can work back from that and at least set the conditions where that might arise. And I think that would be a really, really good start. But I'd be very interested to know what Nora says if you ask her that question.
Will. I will definitely ask her that. And I feel what you describe, it would help us all to unlock this potential that we all have inside in us and that we have put on layers of conditioning over centuries. And once we dig down deep inside and we see this, what drives us, nobody can stop us. And if we as UN staff would lead by example, it could really trigger even more change. So let's hold this vision. And one of my last questions for you, hopefully future Secretary General, is what kind of book or practice or episode of your Accidental Gods podcast would you assign to all staff tomorrow?
Whoa. You mean a book to read or a podcast to listen to, or?
Exactly. Like, what do you think can put people on this path, on this journey?
That's such a good question. Well, the obvious answer would be Any Human Power, which was my last novel, which was endeavoring to craft a way forward. But that feels like that's a really cheap and easy answer. There must be a better one.
That just shows how connected you are with yourself and your authenticity.
Yes, possibly. Or possibly not. One thing, what have I read recently, or what have I thought about? And I've gone to a reading going, you have to read this. And there are fiction books, but I just recommend them because they're beautifully written, not necessarily because I think they open the doors to where we need to go.
Well, you
Got
don't need to come up with it
it's
now.
very hard. I think so, but it wouldn't be this. It wouldn't be one. I think I would probably offer a suite of about 5 books. One would be Bob Falconer's book, The Others Within Us. One would be just listen to Tim Logan's Future Learning Design podcast, any episode that you like. Andrea Hyatt's Love and Philosophy podcast, any episode that you like. Vanessa Andriotti's Hospicing Modernity, and the most recent one just out is Outgrowing Modernity. And Tyson Yunkaporta Right Story, Wrong Story. I think those would get us into a frame where we could begin to hold slightly different conversations. But if you ask me again tomorrow, I would almost certainly have a different answer.
There's so many brilliant thinkers already who came up with a lot of great solutions. So I think anything that can get us started will help. And we'll put it in the show notes and hopefully it will inspire some to start listening to it. And maybe the very, very last question, if I may, do you have one simple daily regenerative practice that our listeners could start today to calm maybe our nervous system that's so needed in this crisis
Yeah,
mode?
just go and sit or stand barefoot on the grass. I mean, find yourself in a natural place, in a place where the web of life is most alive around you. Even if you're in the middle of the city, there will be a park somewhere. Or if you're out not in the city, and find the place where your body feels most alive. There are places that are designed for us to be, and sit there or stand there. Just give yourself 10 or 15 minutes. It takes that long for your nervous system to stop jangling and breathe down into the earth, up to the sky, and just insofar as you can. So I have a practice of gratitude, compassion, and joyful curiosity light the fires inside. I am so grateful. I am so in love with this place. And this is amazing. I wonder what happens next. That moment of uncertainty and keeping awake and open, and let the world, let the web of life become alive for you.
Wow, I think for that reason, I want to put plants into all offices in the UN. And I think also the beautiful rose garden in front of the headquarters in New York was designed exactly for that.
Yeah.
So let's all go out there and enjoy the roses,
Yeah.
feel gratitude, and connect with the web of life around us. And thank you so much for making it so visible and so understandably and fascinating in this podcast. And I hope we inspired a lot of our colleagues to dig deeper into this topic. And I just want to thank you with all my heart for all the wisdom you shared and the time you spent here. And I hope we will continue this conversation
Totally.
in the
Yes. I'm
future.
so grateful that you're doing this and that if we change the UN, we could change the world. This is a big leverage point, Silke. So thank you. This feels really generative. Thank you for all that you're doing and for the invitation.
Thank you, Manda.